preliminaries in a panel discussion. I'm going to ask those of you who have conversations to please take them outside, but that would be sad because then you'd be missing the pearls of wisdom. If you must speak to somebody, please do so in a whisper. And I deeply appreciate your cooperation. So this is how it works. At every table, you have pads of paper and pens. Each panelist will have exactly 5 minutes, and I don't have a beautiful gong, I have an irritating kitchen timer that will let us know when 4 minutes are up, then they'll know they have 1 more minute, and that's it. 5 minutes to present, to answer the question that I will pose. If you have a question for them that you feel would be good to pose, please print it out. Don't write it out because it's hard enough for me to read to begin with. So if you can print it out, I would appreciate it. And if you have a question for a particular panelist, title it Arthur or Uri or whoever you wish to have address it. We will not be able to have every question answered. We will only choose one question that will be given to either the entire panel that each person will then respond to, or to the particular person. And they will then have 2 minutes to respond to that. Following that, and you'll see this will go very quickly, they will each have 1 minute to either sum up what they were speaking about or add what they didn't have time to say previously. And the question is simple. The question is, what is your vision for Tikkun Olam? We will begin with Rabbi Uri Regev.
Thank you, Yocheved. Genesis 18 holds the key to a perplexing, frequently misunderstood concept of Bchirat Israel. It says, "Shall I hide from Abraham that which I am about to do, as Abraham is to be a source of blessing to all humanity? For I have singled him out, namely, I have chosen Abraham, so that he may teach his children and his offspring after him to keep the way of God, la'asot tzedakah u'mishpat, to do what is justice and righteousness, leman havi Elohim, so that God may bring about that which he has promised." So what is Tikkun Olam? There are different perspectives, different ideas. Yesterday I spoke a bit about it. In short, I think that there are 2 dimensions. One was alluded to by Ruth Messenger yesterday, namely the commitment to the betterment of the world. The other that I alluded to yesterday is the not just willingness, but the sense of obligation to turn beyond the letter of the law, beyond halakha, beyond halachic acrobatics, in order to abide by the overriding principles, meta-halachic principles of Darchei Shalom, of Tikkun Olam, of Chilul Hashem and Kiddush Hashem, and others that you are familiar with as much as I. So, we are between Shmot and Va'era. The message of Shmot was, Moses showed us what is the yardstick for Jewish leadership. Here is Moses growing up in the palace of Pharaoh, goes out and sees a Jew persecuted, beaten by an Egyptian. He has no reason to get involved, no reason to intervene, but he does. And he kills the Egyptian and protects the Jew. The next day, as you may recall, he goes out and sees 2 Jews fighting, and he sees one in the right, one in the wrong, and he intervenes for no other reason than a commitment to do what's right, and helps the one who is persecuted. And then he flees away, as you recall, and goes to Midian, and there he sees the 7 daughters of Jethro, the attempting to draw water and being heckled and intimidated and whatever by the male shepherds. And here he is getting involved, helping the 7 daughters. And what's the common theme? The common theme is he sees wrong and he gets involved because he feels it's his obligation as a Jewish leader to do what's right. Whether it is between a Jew and an un-Jew, whether it's a domestic Jewish dispute, or whether it's to help the world out there and to help the Gentiles. And in our parasha, we learn of the Sotah. We learn of the Sotah, and what we find is that for the sake of Shlom Bayit, one may cause the name of God to be wiped away, written on a parchment in the water. So you go against the rule that, of course, this is a sacred writing and you can't touch it, but for the sake of Shlom Bayit, even wiping out the name of God is permitted and required. So what is Tikkun Olam? I speak about the Israeli perspective. To me, it is Genesis 18:18, La'asot tzedakah u'mishpat. It is what the Declaration of Independence offers as the core and the soul of a Jewish and democratic state, to be established on the principles of liberty, justice, and peace as taught by the Hebrew prophets, and to uphold full social and political equality to all, regardless of religion, gender, or race, and yes, to ensure freedom of religion and conscience. God knows we have a lot of work to do before Tikkun Olam becomes a true and full reality. Oh, good. So let me tell you. We have a real challenge. Because, all right, we now know what's right. We know what's necessary. But just a few days ago, the Israel Democracy Institute published their annual Israel Democracy Index. For us, and I'm sure everybody in the room, we view Judaism and democracy as complementary, mutually strengthening, and both building up the notion of a Jewish Tikkun Olam vision. Well, the Israel Democracy Index, published a few days ago, reveals a threatening, disturbing, dangerous reality, in which I'll just give you one example, because Yocheved warned me that she is on the side of Gvura today. So when you look at the decline or ascent, as you wish, of the response to the question, Israel is defined as both Jewish and democratic state. Which part of this definition is more important to you personally? In 2010, almost half of the respondents said, yeah.
Finish the sentence.
2010, half of the respondents are saying both Jewish and democratic. 2014, only 24.5% think both Jewish and democratic is personally important to me. 2010, 17%, 32% said Jewish state is most important. Today, 38.9%. I could give you the breakdown and you would see who is most responsible for giving up on Jewish and democratic, those who define themselves as Haredi or Orthodox. We have a challenge in teaching a Judaism that's both Jewish and democratic, which is the only way to bring Tikkun Olam to our world.
Thank you. Rabbi Rebecca Serling.
Oh boy, that's a hard act to follow. So I'm going to begin by highlighting the work of some of the Rabbis Without Borders fellows who are working in the area specifically of Tikkun Olam. So first I want to call forward Rabbi Ruth A. Bush-Magner, who is working for an organization called Ohalah. And the mission of Ohalah is for advocating and advancing the growth of the diversity of the Jewish people. They reach around the world, reaching out to Jews of color in every place, both within the United States and the world at large. They run a summer camp that each year brings together 45 to 50 Jews of color in this country to help them get to know each other, to help them understand their role within the Jewish people. As you can understand, many Jews of color feel quite marginalized within the larger Jewish world. And she is working incredibly hard to make Jews of color colors feel comfortable and to educate those of us who are not from communities of color about the fact that many Jews of colors exist in our world. Secondly is Juan Mejia, who is working primarily with Jews who may have been hidden Jews or conversos in Latin America and South America, and helping to educate them as to their Jewish heritage and helping to bring them back into the fold. I also want to highlight the work of Rachel Contraster, who's the Director of Programs at Trua. Ruth Messenger mentioned Trua several times yesterday in her talk, and they are really working very hard to bring human rights here in the United States into the national conversation and to show that Jews have a voice in this conversation and a voice that needs to be heard. And there's several people here in this room whose work I just want to give a name to as well. I know Mark Soloway has worked tirelessly for Hazon and also in the efforts of building a better environment, and that's incredibly important. And also, I feel there are different modalities for Tikkun Olam. I feel like Shefa's music and her chanting has opened huge worlds of healing for lots of people, and Rachel Barenblatt's words through her poetry and her writing has done the same thing. And these are all different paths in different ways of creating Tikkun Olam in our world. And as Director of Rabbis Without Borders, I feel that my role is to help challenge and support these rabbis who are doing Tikkun Olam work in a variety of ways. And I seriously mean challenge, and I seriously mean support. The challenge is, when we have people in the Rabbis Without Borders Fellowship, our goal is to help expand their borders. When we say Rabbis Without Borders, we're not like Doctors Without Borders, we're not sending rabbis, at least yet, to all ends of the earth, but rather pushing the borders of their own thoughts. And so anybody who is looking to heal the world first needs to look at themselves and think about, where do I see the boundaries of what I can do? And we challenge people very strongly to push through that, to see an expansive world, to see where their work can be done in new and different and innovative ways. And then the support piece is that we network people together so that they can receive support for the work that they are doing, both from their peers and from myself and the other faculty at Rabbis Without Borders and Klal. Because doing this kind of work to heal the world is hard. I'm sure anybody in this room who is working in these new areas has felt that. It is hard to be out there on a limb saying words and fighting for causes that others don't agree with or may not have had their consciousness raised around. And we need desperately to support each other in doing this work. And so I'm very proud of the fact that Rabbis Without Borders provides that support for people. And I think those dual weights of balance, both the challenge and the support, are crucially important in moving forward any kind of healing and Tikkun Olam work in this world. So if you're interested in the fellowship, please look for the flyers outside. Somebody yesterday when I was speaking came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh, but this sounds wonderful, but I can't afford to come to New York 4 times a year." And I said, well, this is a good thing, it's a fellowship. We cover your costs. So, and we do this specifically, I want to be very clear, because we know that there are so many rabbis who are not coming from places of wealth, either personally or in your professional lives, in your congregation, or in the work that you're doing. And we want to kind of flatten the hierarchy that we know exists within the rabbinate, where there are wealthier rabbis, either from congregation or community, that can do things, and people who don't have that ability. So I want to make that clear. So don't think that you can't apply because you don't have the funds. That is not the case. And that too leads towards healing this world. It's part of our mission to heal the world, is to flatten some of the hierarchies that exist. So, thank you.
I want to remind you to write your question, to print your questions out. We will collect them after the very last speaker. Our next speaker is Rabbi Justice Baird. We have 5 minutes.
So I'm going to try to do 3 nuggets, or 3 little pieces of candy in 5 minutes, since most of you are on dessert at this time. So the first one will be more personal, and the last 2 will be more related to my work at Auburn Seminary in New York. Some of you may be familiar with the scholar Paulo Freire, who a generation ago introduced the line of thinking he calls pedagogy of the oppressed. He's a Brazilian educator, and he was working mostly with poor, oppressed people in South America. And his Torah was that people who experience oppression can be the change makers themselves. They have a role in bringing about the change in the world that they would like to see, rather than being powerless. It's a pretty compelling piece of Torah, and it's changed the lives of many societies, not only in South America, but in North America. I personally feel very blessed in my life. My wife and I have enough money to live on. We're able to raise our 3 kids. I get paid to do work that is very meaningful to me. And the Jews I often work with do not feel oppressed themselves. And they still are very desperate for participating in justice work. And the primary approach that I hear offered is for them to be allies, among the oppressed. And to me, that's not enough. I think we need a pedagogy of the blessed. I think we need ways of participating in justice work for people who are powerful, who have money, who have resources that's beyond just being allies of those who are oppressed, to help create the kind of world that looks like the shared visions that we sometimes talk about. So that's my first nugget. My second one is related to the intersectionality that I talked about last night. And we, in the last few years, Auburn has been doing some work with the LGBT community and the African American faith community. And what was going on during some of the recent election cycles is that the LGBT marriage equality folks were trying to work with African American faith communities to bring them along to be supportive of marriage equality, if you will, which is controversial in some African American faith communities. And so they would develop relationships with these pastors, black pastors, and just make sure they could get them on board for all of their campaigns. And they'd run through a state or through a town and use them in that way for their campaigns. But it was a fairly transactional way of doing change work. And so there was, we started this work in Chicago where there was a fair amount of bad blood after the 2010 and 2012 election cycles, where African American clergy said, look, you used us for your campaigns, but your LGBT community didn't help us with our needs, in the south side of Chicago or whatever it is. So we were trying to do some repair work, and one of the tools that we realized needed to happen was to help them come up with a shared vision for the society that they wanted to live in. We partnered with a group called the Center for Artistic Activism, which are 2 guys out of New York that have an exercise that basically, it's what you can imagine, right? You sit around in a room for half a day, and you try to paint a picture of what does a street look like in this world that we're trying to do tikkun olam for. What does it feel like? How am I relating to my neighbor? What are my kids doing? What are my parents doing? What does this world taste like and feel like? And when you do that work, right, what happens, of course, you see the amazing, amazing depth of connection that we all want the same thing. We just have different priorities and different ways of getting there. But creating that shared vision is work that I think
1 minute.
In the progressive spiritual community we can do a lot more of. So in my final minute, the third nugget I want to mention is we also have a lot of work to do in terms of a vision of tikkun olam in the progressive religious space. We work way too often from a position of scarcity rather than a position of abundance. And the level of competition and trying to promote our own things is not a healthy way to change the world. So I guess one of my visions for tikkun olam is that those of us working in this space can be more generous with each other and be more open to working together in new ways and to find our niches in a large sea of work that can happen.
Reb Arthur, 5 minutes.
What is tikkun olam? 2 things. One short, only a few words. They're words of greeting and they call for response. Shalom. Salam. Sol, that's the Farsi, the language of Iran, for peace. Sol. Namaste. Peace. Peace. I do this wherever I talk even when it's probably all Jews or all Christians, or occasionally I've had the honor of being invited to speak to an all-Muslim community, because there is no room, no literal room like this room anywhere on the planet that does not have all of us in it. Even if we think it's only Jews, or it's only Christians, or it's only Muslim, it's only Buddhist, whatever. This room has us all in the room. Second, what is Tikkun Olam? There is no Tikkun Olam without Tikkun Tevel, without the healing of this planet. And there is no such thing as either climate activism or social justice activism separate from each other. No such thing. I've begun to talk about what I call eco-social justice. The climate crisis impacts far more intensely on, in the United States, Black, brown, Asian, Native communities, in the world, in Africa, in parts of Asia, than on the rest of us. And it does impact the rest of us. In 2003 or 4, 70,000 Europeans died of a heat wave. Europeans, developed countries, died of a heat wave. We need to see the unity, and there is too little, even or even especially in the Jewish community, of the understanding of the interwovenness of the climate crisis and racial crisis, economic crisis. They are interwoven. There is eco-social justice. Last night I began, but only really began, to speak about the Asiya world of Tikkun Tevel. I want to do more of that. In your tables, there are a couple of papers that were there last night. Some of you have gotten them then, some of you may not have, and are welcome, encouraged, implored to take them now. But one aspect that I didn't really get to unfold was what we call Mom Pop. That is, move our money, protect our planet. It was sparked by the 350 Bill McKibben call for divestment. But it is deeper and broader and uses different language from divestment. The simple reason, but it's not the basic one, is that in the Jewish community, as I'm sure we all know, the word divestment has become treif. No matter what you are talking about, the word divestment has become treif. But that's not really the reason we're calling it move our money, protect our planet. It's more because there are levels of moving our money that are not just investment. So I guess I'm going to have to point you mostly to this pink sheet that says rabbinic call, move our money, protect our planet. Several of us among us, as well as our Rebbe, signed this rabbinic call, and the numbers have now grown way beyond what's on the piece of paper. I invite you, the piece of paper invites all of us to sign and join in signing it, and more important, to act on it. So I hope that Ohalah-oriented congregations, for whatever movement you are rabbis and rabbinic pastors and cantors in, that whatever movement, you will go back to your congregation and say, we need to look at where we are buying our electric power. We need to look at what banks our checking accounts and our savings accounts are in. If you have investments, we need to look at what the investments are and how to get them out of carbon. And if you vote, your government is giving enormous subsidies to the most profitable corporations on the planet. Those are the pharaohs of our generation, and we should not be paying the pharaohs to oppress us and to destroy our world.
Thank you, Rabbi. We have a few people with the runners. Please stand. There's Lynn and Ed and Laura. If you have a question, please lift your question up, and she's going to come get it, and she'll bring it to me, and we will very quickly discern which questions we will do, and then each speaker will have 2 minutes to respond either to the personal question or to a question from all of us.
They're going to let Red Bull. I want a picture. There they are.
Okay, we'll start with Rev. Arthur. What do you make of the fact that the ecological destruction in Mitzrayim was due not directly to Pharaoh, but to the plagues that Hashem sent so that we would be liberated? You have 2 minutes to respond.
My theology is that Yud He Vav He, which sent the plagues, is not a king, a super pharaoh in the sky, but that Yud He Vav He is the interbreathing, interliving of all life. And an oppressive ruler enslaving workers is also enslaving the earth. The BP that created a thing in the Gulf of Mexico that killed 11 of its own workers also brought a plague upon the Gulf of Mexico. The difference between Pharaoh and Moses, Aaron, and Miriam was that Pharaoh was shocked and scared by each plague, but he said what Don Rumsfeld said, oh, stuff happens. A euphemism for shit happens, right? The locust, each one. Oh, God, scary, but an accident. The leaders of Am Yisrael understood Yud He Vav He as meaning there is an interconnection, and they knew it was no accident that these things were happening, not because a king in the sky was sending them, but because they got what Yud He Vav He really meant. It's Adonai is hundreds, thousands of years later. They got the interwovenness of the breath of Yud He Vav He. So the Pharaoh invaded, shattered that interwovenness, and the interwovenness responds by shattering. Pharaoh, his whole society, the earth. That's my understanding of what was going on.
Rev. Justice. To bring this down to a small question, the question is a large question. In your view, how has the view of the Jewish community changed within the African American culture? 2 minutes.
Do you think it's about how African Americans perceive Jews, or about how Jews perceive African Americans?
How they perceive us. Yes?
Let me just address that real quickly. I was active in the civil rights movement of the 60s. There was a bond in that we both were oppressed minorities. I sense that in this activism, that is civil rights activism that's happening now, there has been a change in the perception of the Jewish community by the Afro-American activist community. I'm wondering if you perceive that and how I can be sensitive to that change.
Okay, great. So I would say I think there is, my sense is there is a perception change, as you described, but there's also a reality change. Our Jewish experience in America is dramatically different than it was 50 years ago. So the reality has changed and the perception has changed. You know, the idea of a Jewish president is not crazy. You know, we have Jewish lawmakers. We have Jewish. There's no Protestant on the Supreme Court, and there's three Jews. It's like so. Yeah, it's different. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, many of the black theologians who are sort of the heartbeat of of some of this work over recent decades. I'm thinking of people